Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you back for Whitley Penn's Energy Executive Profile, Series number 7. I don't know what point I'm going to stop saying the numbering, but we're on 7, and we're going strong. So today I'm excited. We have Matt Miller of Grey Rock Energy Partners here. It's a special NAPE edition. We are on Wednesday of NAPE. We're hoping to release this tomorrow on Thursday for all you NAPE attendees. It's an exciting time in the industry. I know there's a little bit of gloominess, not only in Houston but over the sector. So we're going to hear Matt's thoughts on that. And Matt, why don't you briefly introduce yourself? Give us a rundown of what you do for Grey Rock Energy Partners.
Sure. Thanks for having me. First off, it's my favorite holiday of the year, NAPE. Grey Rock is set up to be a investor in non-operated working interest in the U.S. unconventional plays. So we have investments in the Permian, Bakken, Eagle Ford, Haynesville, but we evaluate other areas, Marcellus, Powder River Basin, that sorts of things. I'm a co-founder and managing director, so that probably means something like jack of all trades, master of none around the shop. We have 16 folks on staff, but if you walk our halls, we're much more like a oil and gas company than a private equity fund. We have on-staff reservoir engineering, land, accounting, finance.
And you guys are all out of Dallas, correct?
All but one. We have Old Salt landman, Kirk Lazarine, came out of Chevron, and he's based in Houston. Actually, he lives in Katy. And the rest of Grey Rock Global, as is affectionately known, is up in Dallas. So
perfect. So, I know what NAPE is. I love NAPE too. I attend it every year. It's a great time to see a lot of people in the industry. And, there's the daytime events, right? You got to do, but it's the evening events that I think are always fun and get people after a few cocktails to open up and just kind of get to know them a little bit better. But tell us, what does NAPE mean to you? Now, are you really coming here to look at deals, see people? I mean, what's your kind of synopsis of it?
So NAPE actually stood for something along the way. I think it's North American Petroleum Expo, but now it's just I noticed that they just call it NAPE corporately. It's kind of like it's a drinking conference for oil men and ladies. So theoretically in the old days there were deals done at NAPE. I've never actually seen a deal done at NAPE. Buddies maybe joke around about let me buy an acre here or there just to say we got a deal done on the floor. But yeah, a lot of it's about networking, seeing folks that you haven't seen maybe this year or last year, and understanding, honestly, what I use it for is to get a pulse on the industry, right? So how's everybody feeling? Kind of what are some key themes out there? I can remember a NAPE where the entire Mississippi lime play was on sale. I can remember a NAPE where, every other booth was unoccupied because of the 2014 collapse. I can remember a NAPE where Elvis was standing next to a glitter Corvette because the equity had returned in 2016. So there's always something that I think are interesting key takeaways, and it's always beneficial to be here on behalf of our team and then also on behalf of our investors.
So NAPE last year was probably what, minerals and water?
Yeah, minerals, a lot of minerals, a lot of water, maybe some Louisiana Austin chalk was the kind of thesis play that probably didn't bear a lot of fruit for a lot of folks, but yeah, a lot of minerals.
Well, what are your buzzwords you expect to hear for this NAPE?
Gloom and doom, maybe something along the lines of bearishness, right? So you got, I think at a high level, what we're dealing with is capital constraints within the industry. Investors have pulled back, whether you're talking about private equity capital, which is down, 60 to 80% year over year, whether you're talking about new equity and debt for the publicly traded companies, right? Those are down 65 and 95% since 2016. A lot of this theme of we're going to live within cash flow. I think that's going to be a lot of what we hear. I don't think that we hear on the ground a lot of companies that are saying, you know what, we're just crushing it right now. Things are just going great around the shop. I think what we've seen is with prices in the mid 50s and then with a one handle on gas, a lot of publicly traded equities are having a tough time. And previously investors have been there to bail them out. By our count, roughly $200 billion of external capital has been injected into the U.S. oil and gas system in the past 10 years. That's pretty much gone. So I think it'll be interesting to take everybody's temperature and see what's going on this year.
Well, on that cheery note, no. So, Matt, you and I go way back, but there was something, a special moment or thing we were a part of together. I want you to tell the group. You were a part of a cult Dutch energy documentary called Shell Cowboys. Tell us about that gloriness and how you got to be a part of that.
Yeah, so I was part of the Shaley Cowboys. This was what I was told was the 60 Minutes of the Netherlands. Came over and really wanted to dive into shale. So I was referred by our good friend Nathan over here, and then also a geologist by the name of Kent Bowker, who actually worked at Mitchell Energy and is in the book The Frackers and that sort of thing. So it was an interesting time because that's the first documentary I've been a part of. I actually was at a wedding in Augusta, Georgia, and one of the groomsmen came up to me and said he was an insurance broker, and that he had to do an oil and gas training. Obviously, he lives in South Carolina, and he's at a wedding in Georgia. The guy has, like me, no business being in oil and gas. And he said, I Googled shale to go to this training, and your video came up, Shale Cowboys. So I just wanted to come over and introduce myself. I felt a little...
Did you give an
autograph?
autograph?
My own Leo moment.
Autograph signing?
Yeah.
So that is, I know the video is somewhere out there on YouTube. If our listeners can find it, I encourage you to go. They probably interviewed a ton of people, but I will say, we thought Matt would get a minute or two, and he ended up being a good chunk of the show. So
yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. Go find it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And if you can find the 1 second cameo that I made, that's bonus points. And so in the beginning, Matt, let's go back. You're in Dallas now, but where'd you grow up? What's your childhood story?
I grew up in Athens, Georgia, which I also affectionately refer to as a drinking town with a football problem. Home of the Dogs, and from there went to the University of Virginia for school.
So you go to UVA, but I know you love Georgia. You grew up in Athens. What's the thought process there as a kid?
My sister went to Georgia, and she said that mom knows too much. You need to get out of town. I had another sister that went to Washington and Lee, which is in Lexington, Virginia, just down the road. They took me over to Charlottesville, and that pretty much sealed the deal. It was the only school I applied to. Loved my time in Charlottesville. It's a really, really great town, really great student population, tons of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on that campus. I think it's beautiful. It's amazing. When you go to a school like that from Georgia, the kids that you went to college with, are you still connecting with them? Are some of those in Dallas? Do you still get to see a lot of them, or do you kind of lose touch because everyone spreads across the U.S.?
Actually, I think you'd be surprised at how many UVA folks there are in Texas. Chris Transier is one of my fraternity brothers. He runs Fortis Minerals. Thad Darden is on our team. Grey Rock, he had been at UVA. Mason Manulik, a base in oil and gas in Fort Worth, went to UVA. So there's a decent crew of UVA folks hiding out in Texas in oil and gas. I'd say that the Texans, generally speaking, went to Charlottesville and then, in true Texas style, just established their own colony at the Kappa Sigma house. So that's good.
Oh, well, AEK to B. Okay, so UVA. I've been on campus, wonderful campus. So I'm, this is post college. I was there for a different reason, but I'm all of a sudden walking around campus and I start to see there's these Z's and these MIPs or MP signs all over campus, and I start asking somebody, and they go into this detail of all these secret societies at UVA, and then I went on the internet and I went down this rabbit hole and wasted 8 hours of my life. But tell us a little bit about, to me it's kind of interesting, not outside of the fraternities and sororities, there's all these secret societies there. Is it really that prevalent and interesting, or is this something from the outside looking in just looks interesting?
I'd say it's pretty interesting. It's a big part of the culture. The three main secret societies are the Imps, the Sevens, and the Z's. Okay, so another weird names, but the way it kind of always gets described to me is that the Imps, you know who they are. They actually have a public initiation ceremony, despite being a secret society. The Z's, you find out who they are at graduation. The Sevens, you don't find out who they are until they die. When they die, they actually ring the chapel bell 7 times and lay 7 roses on their grave. So the Sevens, you never know who they are, but you know what they do. which is kind of interesting. So the sevens are philanthropic. They'll do things like they'll have students that are staying over for Thanksgiving break. Let's say they're international students or something along those lines. They'll hand each of those students $777.77 to meet in the 7th aisle of Harris Teeter to buy Thanksgiving dinner for 7 families in the Charlottesville area. Things of that nature.
Seems like you know a lot of details there. We have a 7
during our convocation. So basically, there was a envelope with that had kind of floated down on the stage for a speaker, with a check in it for $777.76. And nobody could understand the 6 until they realized they weighted the envelope with a penny.
Oh,
Kinda
nice.
So there's definitely some cool stories in there. I don't think it's as skull and bones as you're giving it credit for. It's more philanthropic, from what I understand.
From what I understand, of course.
From what I understand.
No, I know there's Eli Banana. There's all kinds of There's all kinds of groups, and I have no idea what they do and how big they are. But to me, it's fascinating. And
Peter Kemp, who works at Providence Energy, was an Eli Banana.
Oh, okay.
Actually, another UVA guy.
So is that just like another fraternity?
That's
social
more the
group?
drinking one.
Okay.
That's more the.
We'll have to ask
one.
Peter about that. So if anyone of you want to waste some time on the internet, just UVA secret societies, thank you, or maybe you won't thank me. I don't know. So post college, you're graduating from UVA. You're a Georgia kid. Do you want to go back to Georgia, or is that just kind of where the first opportunity took you?
Yeah, so I got a job at consulting firm McKinsey out of undergrad, and I was in the Atlanta office. I'd never been across the Mississippi. I hate to say that up until this point. Maybe I went to Colorado, went skiing once, but so I got a job at McKinsey. I was based in Atlanta, but the vast majority of my clients were in New York. They were private equity firms, generally speaking, and so I kind of was a little workhorse for them and trying to find opportunities for those private equity funds to invest in. Run due diligence on targets during the kind of due diligence period during the bid phase, and then after a company had been acquired, go in as a consultant and either increase profit somehow, whether that's increasing revenues or decreasing costs. And so I worked for McKinsey for a couple of years. Really enjoyed the experience. It was a great experience in that it allowed me to try industries that I had never tried before. So things like telecom, retail, neither one of which was for me. Everything from I worked for a casino firm, I worked for an aircraft manufacturer, and then I eventually landed on hey, I'm really interested in energy. Actually, I was really interested in clean energy. So I didn't start out being interested in oil and gas. I started out thinking solar and wind were going to take over the world. And I found out some inconvenient truths, as I was investigating this along the way. But that's originally how I got interested in energy. And
so, McKinsey, you're on the road like 90% of the time, is that right?
Monday through Thursday every week.
Okay. And so
you're executive platinum wherever you want, everything. Yeah.
And when you're young out of college, that's got to be great. What are some of the, when you look back at those trips, favorite cities you got to visit?
London was cool on an expense account. New York is better as an analyst on an expense account than living there, I would argue. McKinsey analysts get paid the same, whether you're in Atlanta or New York.
But you're probably just working the whole time, so you not get to see much? Or
yeah.
You get to see
I think that's a fair that's a fair characteristic. Toronto was really pretty for the few days that I was there. 72 hours in the hotel room or whatever. And it was great.
And so, how did you decide to leave McKinsey? Where you decided you like energy? Did an opportunity come up? Did you start looking for an opportunity? Was
my last client was a guy, John Wilder at Bluescape Resources, and John, I was fortunate enough that John gave me a job offer to join him in Bluescape. This was in 2008. And Bluescape is a at the time we were heavily invested in the Marcellus Shale, largely actually with a West Virginia position, though we did have some Pennsylvania as well. So that's really where I cut my teeth in what I'd call true oil and gas. As a finance kid trying to act like a landman, so drinking out of a fire hose for 5 years at Bluescape.
Did you spend much time up in the Marcellus when you guys were?
I went to West Virginia a couple times.
Okay.
It was so we went out on site a couple times. West Virginia is really pretty country, but it is sparsely populated, I would argue. So it was great. I didn't spend much time in Pennsylvania though. Went to Pittsburgh maybe a couple times for deals, but.
And so you guys put together this large asset for the company and then sell it? I mean, what was that kind of experience like?
Yeah, so Bluescape evolved from, what I'd argue is largely kind of like a family office on steroids, right? Private balance sheet capital into third-party capital. So Bluescape, currently manages private equity funds on behalf of external limited partners, right? So traditional private equity fund structure. And I was there, kind of during that transition. We did have some success on selling on transactions on the kind of, call it the family office capital side of things. I left Bluescape to start Grey Rock in the early innings of kind of Bluescape becoming a true private equity fund accepting outside capital.
And you were already in Dallas when that happened?
I was already in Dallas, yeah.
Okay.
So I'd lived in Dallas for 5 years or so.
So give us the rundown as a young 20-something, Dallas and Atlanta. How do they stack up?
Dallas is Atlanta, but with better Mexican food.
Okay. What about traffic? Isn't Atlanta traffic
yeah,
insane?
So Dallas, that's a good question. So I also would say this. If you're, let's say that you're from Minneapolis and you fly into Dallas for a conference, right? And your conference is downtown Dallas, and you fly into DFW and you drive, you're staying at maybe the Sheraton downtown in Dallas, and you have a conference in that hotel, and then you leave. You kind of walk away with saying, hey, Dallas probably isn't my favorite place in the world to be. The exact same thing is true of Atlanta, right? So if you're flying into Hartsfield and you got a conference downtown, you eat dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe, you're probably going to be a little unhappy with your experience. I'd say that they're pretty similar in that regard. You need to get entrenched in the town to understand, kind of like Houston, right?
Yeah, the people and all.
You understand the people and kind of what's unique about what you got going on in your own town. But I'd say, generally speaking, Dallas is a little bit easier to get around. Atlanta's traffic is atrocious. It's really, really bad.
The cost of living is similar?
Cost of living is pretty similar. Okay. Dallas's economy, I'd argue, is more vibrant than Atlanta's. Okay. I'd say that the one thing that I love about Texans is the Texas mentality of tending to be meritocratic, right? So if you're the smartest, hardest working person, you're going to tend to get ahead. Right? That's not guaranteed, but generally speaking, you're going to tend to get ahead. I mean, look at you.
That's right.
Look at you.
That's right.
And in Georgia, there tends to be more of a pay your dues mentality, such that you get ahead, but you're going to get ahead when you're 50, not when you're in your 30s.
I get it. That makes sense. And Dallas has seen so much growth. I mean, I know Atlanta has probably too, but it seems like in the last 10 to 12 years, Dallas has just exploded. So you're at Bluescape, and how does this idea for Grey Rock even get started? I mean, what?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we had thought at the time, and this is kind of me and my co-founders, Griffin Perry and Kirk Lazarine.
And what's your age at the time?
Griffin and I are 28, and Kirk is a little bit older than that. Okay. He had worked at Chevron for 23 years.
How'd you guys know Kirk?
Kirk worked as a consultant on a Bluescape project for us in the Eagleford.
Okay.
So at the time, this was kind of version 1.0 of the shale flip game. So what we had said is, hey, there had been this theme, right? And the theme was, I'm a landman, and I'm going to amass a few thousand acres, and I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to do really well on that, by the way. I'm going to flip it. Who am I going to flip it to? I'm going to flip it to Chesapeake, probably the most known quantity, but Devon, Cabot, Range, somebody along those lines, or they're going to amass million-acre style packages, and they're going to flip again. And that flip was kind of in the original JV structure, largely related to foreign national oil companies, but Sumitomo, Chevron, Shell, Exxon, KNOC, CNOC, everybody needed their hands on some shale, right? And generally speaking, the wells that were going into investor presentations. Some of this may not have changed. The wells that were going into investor presentations cost twice as much as what the operators were saying, and they produced half as much as what the operators were saying. It was a great game in terms of flipping acreage until it ended. And we would argue it ended, largely Chesapeake tried to move its Eagle Ford position, and this was kind of in 2012 timeframe. And it was kind of the first large shale divestiture or JV or something along those lines that kind of flopped. And so the original thesis behind Grey Rock was, oh, wow, you're going to have a bunch of companies, call them portfolio companies, call them private companies, however you want to think about it, to have their hands on 10,000 acres or 5,000 acres. And, maybe they've got $50 million of capital at their back, but that wasn't even going to be close to the amount of capital necessary to actually develop these shale positions. Therefore, people were going to need non-operated working interest partners. That was a cute thesis. It was entirely wrong because, at the end of the day, the private equity firms got larger and the commitments to private equity portfolio companies got larger. What we found along the way that was interesting and true is that, hey, on average across the unconventional plays, roughly 50% of the working interest belongs to the operator. The other 50% is chopped up amongst a bunch of other non-operators. Those non-operators may themselves be operating companies, so you can think about Marathon owns non-op underneath Penn, Virginia, or Concho owns non-op underneath Diamondback, those sorts of things. And then there's a smattering of folks that have their hands on non-operated working interests that aren't maybe strategic owners, right? So landmen, geologists, single shingle oil and gas companies. And there's a lot of capital that's going into the ground. There's a lot of CapEx. And what we found is there's a decent amount of non-op owners out there who can't shoulder the burden of a large capital program going on in their leasehold, right? So they may have the first couple $1 million to participate, but not the follow-on $20 million. And that's really where Grey Rock is kind of oriented to its investors, and what we're set up to do is to invest in large-scale capital programs that maybe are too big for an individual and non-core for an operating company.
And at the time, they're not, there's a lot of non-op funds. They're not a lot, but there's some out there. But at the time, there wasn't a lot, correct? Is that?
Yeah. When we first went to investors and we said, hey, we want to raise money for non-operated working interests, they asked us, why don't you want it to get drilled? And we were like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, it's not going to be operated. So why don't you're just going to have acreage that's just sitting there? And we're like, oh, we're talking past each other. This is what non-op is. Non-op's been around, since Colonel Drake and all these guys, right? So there's always been partners in wells for risk sharing, capital sharing, those sorts of things. So in the early years, a lot of it, from at least talking to investors, was an education experience. Here's what a joint operating agreement is. Here's what a consent non-consent is. Here's why non-op gets created in the first place, right? That's kind of confusing. Why does Diamondback need your 10%? Why is Diamondback selling you 10%? That doesn't make any sense to me. And you're like, well, I'm not buying from Diamondback. I'm buying from a landman that has his hands on 10%. So it's confusing to the East Coasters.
Yeah, well, yeah. Why is my working interest not the same as my net revenue interest? No, so you're 28. You and Griffin, I'm sure Griffin's somewhere around the same age, and you decide to go raise this fund, and you're meeting with LPs, and I know you got Kirk with you, who's you got a little more years under the belt. But how tough was that first experience? And I know raising the first one's always the hardest. Give us some color on that how long that took and what it was like.
Yeah, so I'd argue that it's the best time you never want to have again. It's a ton of fun, but it's extremely stressful. So the way I kind of describe it to folks that are going to go out and try raising money on your own is it's stress of a different kind and not degree. You've been really stressed out at work before, but at the end of the day, that didn't mean that you were going to not be able to pay your mortgage and not be able to pay your car payment. And there was a very linear relationship between the amount of money I was spending and those events potentially coming forward to me. So it was tough. It was tough. I think that we were just dumb enough and just lucky enough to pull it off. We've had the support of some great investors along the way who have supported us for 8 years now, and those are long-standing, durable relationships. They understand the cyclicality of oil and gas, and they understand the benefits of investing counter-cyclically as opposed to pro-cyclically, right? So most folks want to get into oil when oil prices are high. The right time to invest is when oil prices are low. Good news for NAPE.
That's right.
Good news.
Taking new LPs now.
So yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And did you guys? I don't know. You don't have to reveal names, obviously, but did you have one anchor tenant or big LP that came in? And can you remember the day when you signed up that first 10, 50, whatever that was?
Sure.
What was that moment like?
Yeah. I can describe to you the first large individual who came in, high net worth individual, actually a gentleman who runs a hedge fund, and he was going to commit $3 million to us. And Griffin and I jumped up and down and hugged each other. So we manage about $450 million right now. So this was a great moment for us at the time, though. And I can remember having the phone call. We had a university endowment who committed to us in our first fund, and but for the grace of God, not entirely sure why they did it. But I can remember trying to act cool on the phone and just trying to be like, oh yeah, absolutely, no problem. But I had to put myself on mute because I was pretty excited.
No, I can imagine. It's nothing like that first big win, right? And so now, you guys tell us about, they have 3 funds. Is that right? And you're raising.
Yeah, we have 3 funds. We manage about $450 million of equity capital across those 3 funds. We do have an RBL in place for some borrowing against our PDP. So our spend is north of kind of that 450 number. And then we are going to go on the road this year and attempt to raise the 4th fund. It's tough out there. Investors are not excited about energy, and that's true whether you're a public company, whether you're a private equity fund, whether you're a private operator. I was in Boston last week just catching up with some current investors, and I had 4 meetings, and every one of those meetings started with the ESG, started with the words ESG. So it's a challenge. And
a tougher question: how did you come up with the name Grey Rock?
Black Rock was taken. So we Griffin and I went and got beers one afternoon. And to be completely honest with you, gray is Meredith's favorite color, his wife.
Okay.
And then we needed to name it after a rock or a tree, or something along a river, right? So
that's right.
Everything was taken in the Delaware Secretary of State. We even looked up Prestige Worldwide.
Oh.
A la Step Brothers. Prestige Worldwide and the Delaware Secretary of State is taken, as is Prestige Worldwide, wide. Believe it or not, true story.
Prestige Worldwide Rock Energy Partners. Well, it's if you're an energy company, right? It's got to have energy, resource,
capital, something along those lines, something
somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Well, good. So right now, or when you were fundraising, or throughout your fundraising, what's the? Is there one question you received from an LP or somebody that was just, entertaining to say the least? Is there anything that pops in your head of some of the things that you've been asked?
That's a good question. So I'd say there's some common questions. There are some mail it in questions. So one mail it in question is, what keeps you up at night? That's an investor who's like, okay, I'm going to check the box. We actually did this meeting, but I'm not really going to ask you, what's going on. We do have some investors that are, they're tough, right? And there was a period of time 2 years ago where there was a professor, Tony Seba, out of Stanford, who had put out this YouTube video and this paper that basically convinced a lot of the folks on the coast, let's say, that everyone was going to be driving an all-electric autonomous vehicle that was under $10,000, in the next 5 years, and therefore oil was toast. And it took Grey Rock a decent amount of time, probably on the order of 6 to 8 months, with repeated data-backed reasons why we thought that rumors of oil's death was greatly exaggerated.
There's a group I know you're familiar with. He has a whole presentation on it. I had him. anyway, it's a gentleman out of here, Houston, who does a great. And I've seen him.
I think the best that I've seen is Brad Olson from Recurrent Investment Advisors.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Brad's super sharp. And
compares it to electricity.
Compares it to the transition from the horse to the Ford Model T, and then compares adoption curves effectively. Just saying, hey, once you reach parity, that's not good enough to make people switch. It needs to be a compelling reason. Which, when you take a step back, you'd say, oh yeah, that actually totally makes sense. I think Brad does a great job and a pretty cogent and succinct argument. I think the thing that got investors over the hump for us was SEBA had this chart that said, your autonomous electric vehicle is going to be $5,000, and we looked up the cheapest golf cart that Club Car sells, and it's $6,500. So we didn't think that. We thought that was a stretch goal.
Yeah. So when you talk to your LPs now, how do you, what's your view on where's the opportunity? I have this chunk of money, Matt. What do you sell me on? Okay, now's the time to put it in. Obviously low prices, but what's the opportunity you're pitching now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the cause for the low prices has been on the margin across the globe has been U.S. production. U.S. production has consistently grown. In both oil and natural gas. And that's kind of, generally speaking, caused the collapse in prices. I think the most encouraging thing that we see is the general decline in shale production that's going to begin in kind of a few years. So we see a structural decline in shale production happening kind of 2023, flattening in 2023. And then a decline in kind of 2025. So the goal is for investors, I'm going to build a portfolio of cash flow positive, PDP heavy assets that are going to participate in this potential oil price upside. If you look at the forward curve right now, I haven't checked it today, but in 2025 to 2030, the forward curve is $50, high 40s, something along those lines. The IEA and the EIA, who aren't necessarily the most bullish oil and gas folks out there, are saying it's probably going to require $100 barrels to balance global oil supply and demand. That's a pretty marked difference. And I know that there's a lot of skepticism on behalf of investors these days, especially when it comes to ESG, carbon. I actually think that for a lot of investors, those are kind of smoke screens because the returns haven't been there in our industry. Such that if we were able to show returns, and I'm speaking just as an industry, I think that these climate concerns are kind of overblown, in my humble opinion.
Kind of the scapegoat, the excuse.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a step back and you look at fracking in the United States, has reduced its coal consumption and increased its natural gas consumption, and therefore our carbon emissions have gone down. And that happened without a carbon tax. That happened entirely related to the free market. Unfortunately for gas producers, that happened because due to low natural gas prices. And we're exporting those low natural gas prices globally now. Global natural gas prices are down 60 to 70% over the past 12 months. I think that does incentivize on the margin for China, India, Japan, South Korea to build natural gas plants instead of coal plants. If you are a believer in less carbon is a good thing, then I'm not going to debate that, but I actually think natural gas is the thing to get you there. I don't think it's not more coal.
And so now we're moving on to the little more personal side here, Matt. We got 20 questions for you.
All right, there we go.
And if you weren't in energy, what would you be doing? What's your dream job?
I'd be a teacher.
Teacher, okay. Yeah. Give me what grade?
Maybe 13th or 14th grade. I think I'd escape the high school. I'd want to be a college professor.
College professor, okay.
Yeah.
What are you teaching? Philosophy? Or?
Yeah, not philosophy. I'd say something like history or English or, something along those lines. Maybe a Civil War class would be good.
It's a good gig. You get tenure and you pretty much get away with anything.
Tenure. That's what I'm talking
right.
about. That's what I'd love to have tenure in oil and gas.
That's right. You just coast. Okay. You don't have kids yet, but if you had a son or daughter graduating from college today, what would you encourage them to go into the energy sector?
We were actually talking about this the other day, and it wasn't related to children, but it was if you had to change jobs today, like if I wasn't going to be a private equity manager, what would I do? I'd go teach myself coding.
I 100% agree on that.
I would go learn R and Python and SQL and stuff because, I mean, at the end of the day, our industry is so stale on the technology that we use. And I'm not going to pick on certain technology providers here, but I think that there's massive improvements. I'd argue that as an industry, we've kind of settled on MS-DOS as just being our standard, and I think we could do a lot more. So I'm pretty excited to see what firms like Cottonwood are able to do in this area, because I think there's a lot of ground to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then also, I mean, if you really, a lot of the people that do have that coding background, they're not always the best business minded.
Right.
So I think if you could really have both, man, you can blaze a trail.
Yeah, it's like an MD, MBA. You know, like if you could have a doctor who understood economics. Yeah,
that's right.
You go far.
Okay. Any podcasts that you're into? Do you listen to podcasts? I mean, what do you see there?
So I listen to Freakonomics because I'm a nerd, and I listen to Hardcore History because
what's Hardcore History? Is that on?
I'm a nerd. So it's basically like a historian, and he kind of goes through certain crucial periods of history in a layman's way, right? So not a very dry way. Tells it as a story. Really great podcast. Eric Hawley, who runs accounting and finance at Grey Rock, actually introduced me to this podcast. And I'm listening to one on World War I right now.
Oh, nice. Are these really long ones? Are they multiple episodes?
So his average episode length is probably on the order of 2 hours.
Okay.
So pop in the car, listen to it for 15, 20 minutes. Then eventually you kind of make your way through it. Really interesting anecdotes along the way. And it's just, I find what people have been willing to do in history is just compelling. It's out of this world, compared to, we may think we have challenges. We don't face anything compared to prior generations.
I think about what I was doing at 18-year-old compared, the people in 25 or 30 or 40. Yeah. They're a lot more of a man than me at 18. I'll say that.
Low bar, but yeah.
That's right. What's your biggest pet peeve?
That's a good question. So I travel a lot, and I'm in an airport all the time, and my biggest pet peeve is somebody walking in the middle of the walkway in the airport, and then they stop and they stand up and they just like look around, and they're just looking at their phone. They are just completely unaware, right? They've got this luggage that was from like Kmart in 1979, and you're like, you don't need to be here. You need to get out of here. You need to
I'd say my traveling pet peeve is, I'm a Southwest guy, the company plane, so to speak. And, it's like when people get out of the ordinary, it's clearly there's a role to play here. One goes first and then it's the next role, right? And these people like jump up and they try to like skip rows so they can get out 2 minutes earlier.
King for a day, and unloading an airplane, I'd change it to military stuff. Because basically what you need to do is everybody in one column needs to stand up and get out, and then in the next column there's too much chaos in this world for that.
The people that are trying to jump in front of a few rows just annoys the crap out of me. Anyway, okay, last book you read.
I'm in the middle of a book. I'm in the middle of a couple of books right now. One is called The Man Who Solved the Market, about Jim Simons, who started Renaissance Capital, which is a kind of an algorithmic trading, one of the first algorithmic trading firms. Really kind of mysterious firm, but the guy who wrote The Frackers, Greg Zuckerman, wrote this book. Really good book.
Okay, I love that book.
And then another is called $1 Billion Whale, about the 1MDB, called crisis or fraud. A guy named Joe Lowe basically embezzled out $4 or $5 billion out of Malaysia with the help of our good friends at Goldman Sachs. So those are pretty interesting stories to be reading right now. I'd say the best book I've read past 5 years would be Thinking Fast and Slow. It's kind of the guys who created this field of study called behavioral economics, and it's written by a guy named Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize for this. But basically, the traditional model of economics is challenged, right? Because basically, you're supposed to be rational, but your brain isn't capable of being rational, and so
there's always bias, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of biases, right? So like recency bias, like you tend to think of companies that have recently advertised to you. There's anchoring bias. So how much are you willing to pay? If I mention a random number to you, your brain actually anchors on that number. Surprisingly, there's also system 1, system 2 thinking, right? So system 1 is 2 + 2 is 4. System 2 is 17 times 35 is, I don't know it either, but so your brain's making these kind of simplifications of complex problems to save time, and it creates all these weird ramifications in real life that are against kind of traditional economics.
Interesting.
Best book I've read in 5 years, so it's good.
I'll check that out. So what's your daily routine? I mean, what's are you a creature of habit? Do you have these things that without fail you revert to these or tendencies? What's your day?
Yeah, I'm a habit guy. I tend to get up at about 6:15, and then I read. So I read a bunch of industry stuff in the morning. So kind of morning notes. You can think of like the Tudor Pickering note, for example, or Baird, or folks like that. I'll read the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Twitter. I love the EFT crowd out there, wherever Mr. Skilling is. Good to have you on. And then I tend to read like books and watch Bloomberg in the morning. But yeah, it's a pretty routine when I'm not on the road.
And what's name a big impact in your life or something that helped mold you throughout your years?
That's a good question. So I think that so I interview kids for this scholarship at UVA every year, and you should see the kids that come through. They're amazing. First, they're 4.0, 1,600 on the SATs, captain of 3 sports, president of student council, right? And then on top of that, they volunteer at the hospital 20 hours a week, right? Just amazing kids. And I start off my interviews every single time with telling them, hey, when I was 17, 18, I sat in your chair and I interviewed for this scholarship and I didn't get it. And that was the first thing in my life I hadn't gotten. So like, it was kind of the first, point of adversity, or however you want to think about it. But I think that was a really good lesson to learn that, hey, there's a big, bright life beyond that, right? And you can always muscle through kind of down times. But it takes moving through adversity, to be better on the other side.
First time to get knocked down, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that actually was a pretty big impact on me.
And so how did you, if you didn't get it and now you're doing the interview, and how did
that
come across?
I don't know.
I like it.
Question.
I like it.
That's a really good. Well, why are you qualified to judge me?
That's right. They turn around, and they walk up, and they leave. Okay, if you could take your wife anywhere in the world, where would it be?
So we love to travel. We do love to travel. I think I'd take her to Paris. We went to Paris on our honeymoon and just loved it. And I think I take her back. And some of this is like my historical nerdness, as we kind of walk around. And she's an art person. She was an art major in college, and so those kind of mesh best in Paris.
So I'm not even going to ask this next one because you already dogged on the question earlier. But
what's
your biggest fear?
What keeps you up?
I'm not gonna ask it. No. We're going to the next one. I'm going to think of a different one. What's one thing you would tell 22-year-old Matt? Or others coming out of college, not necessarily sector or whatever, but, what was your key to success? What really separated you in your early 20s from, everyone else at McKinsey or everyone else from UVA?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that the kids that talk to me these days who are 18, 19, 20 feel like they need to have a plan in place for where they're going to be for the rest of their lives. And, that's kind of one extreme. The other extreme is I have 30-year-olds who now want to get into private equity who haven't done finance ever in their lives, right? So in between those two, call it poles, I think is the right answer in terms of how you're going to orient your professional life. There's time to figure out. It's not forever, but there's time to figure out what you want to do. Find mentors in that space, right? So find sounding boards. The mentors are going to be folks that tend to be 3 and 5 years older than you, I think, not 30 years older than you, I think, on average. It can always be different, but I'd say that's generally speaking my advice is figure out what you want to do. Don't figure out what's good for somebody else, because if it's good for somebody else and it's not good for you, you're not going to last.
Okay, so if you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Good question. Okay, so I'd want. Can I do a group dinner?
Yeah, group dinner. Let's
do a group dinner. Okay,
I like group dinners.
I want Grant and Robert E. Lee.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I want to just
hammer it out.
Let's sit down. Let's talk this out. But I think it's kind of the first episode of like modern war that was just incredibly tragic, and how they were able to kind of move through it. I mean, it was a very tragic episode, and I look back. I read a history book recently where Jefferson. This isn't just a UVA thing. This is Thomas Jefferson tried to pass a bill. So in between 1776 and 1787, the United States kind of had its independence, but didn't have its official forms of government set up yet, right? In 1785, during this kind of transitional phase, Jefferson proposed a bill that would have outlawed slavery in all new territories of the United States. So you think these are only 13 colonies. So Texas didn't exist, Alabama, Mississippi didn't exist, Louisiana. It lost by one single vote. And you think about how much of our country's history has splintered off of that event. It's kind of heartbreaking, right, that it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Where did you pull that out?
I'll send you the book. I'm forgetting the name. Oh, it was
that's good.
Yeah, it's
I didn't know if that was the hardcore history.
No, it's a history of the New American South by Ed Ayers.
And okay, what about music wise? Do you listen to music ever? If you do, what do you listen to?
So I'm going to be one of these kind of all over the place people, like if you're throwing on Outkast and
so like
Big Boy
Little Pump?
Yeah, you know me.
All the Atlanta.
Like to get salty
that's
in
right,
the club.
That's right.
But I'm just as comfortable listening to Robert Earl King as I am to
tonight. Are you going? Are you going to
Robert
Robert King tonight?
I think I'm gonna try to go. I don't know if they're gonna allow me in. I mean, I'm not credit worthy to pay those Kirkland bills. But,
well, if they let me in as a service provider, I'm pretty sure you're good. Okay, so in your career, if there's one person that you would say made the biggest impression on you, who was that?
That's also a really good question. I had a couple guys, partners at McKinsey, one Seth Goldstrom and one John Garcia, and they were hard as nails. I mean, they were tough managers, but it was the best thing. It's kind of like a military boot camp almost. Once you were in their fold, they took care of you, made sure that, and they were doing kind of the most interesting stuff at the firm, I thought. But they kind of taught me that. Excuses are the nails that built the house of failure, right? So keep going, keep your head up, raise your hand if you need help, but you need to be always improving. Good mentors.
Probably great right out of school for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, if money wasn't an object, what's one thing you'd splurge on?
So my biggest pet peeve was how people are in the terminal, right? So either a private terminal or a private aircraft of some sort. That would save time.
The Matt Miller VIP line?
Yeah, that would be great. That'd be great.
Okay, what's the most useless talent you have?
Memorizing movie quotes.
You are a good memory because I mean you can spit out these facts,
Yeah.
so you can regurgitate. Do you have like a photographic?
Yeah, I
memory?
don't know why I do. I don't know why my brain does that. It does that, and it is completely pointless. It's 90% of my brain's taken up with movie quotes. The other 10% is malted hops and bong resin, which is itself a movie quote from Tommy Boy.
Yeah. So what's the most quotable movie in your repertoire?
It's going to depend on crowd, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you gotta play the audience, right? At the end of the day, but
Okay, so you got me, so I'm probably more of an old school.
Yeah, so you're easily Big Lebowski, old
Oh,
school,
yeah, okay.
right?
Nailed it.
Super Troopers.
The harder
right,
one,
right down.
Kindle. We got Kindle over here
Mean
helping
Girls,
us out.
Mean Girls right
She's
over here.
23, 22, you know.
What else? What else do I got? I got Love Actually. I got Mean Girls. I got all this. Trust me. Don't worry. I got this covered.
I'm afraid
too.
you stopped somewhere at 27.
Yeah.
Everyone below, I don't know. But okay, so what TV shows are you binging these days?
So we love like Ozark and Westworld and all those kind of. We actually just started The Sopranos.
Ah,
So we're a little late on that one. I heard it was a good show.
has quite the reputation.
So we started that.
I started Succession not too long ago. We got through that. That's pretty good.
Yeah. One that I watched recently was called, Don't F with Cats. It's a Netflix documentary.
It's good.
It's about like a murderer
Okay.
effectively, and it's a documentary. It's really good. It's pretty dark.
I've seen it pop up. Haven't watched it.
Yeah.
I did watch the Aaron Hernandez documentary.
Oh, I didn't see that one yet.
Man, tough.
Suboptimal.
So we're getting to the end here. Thoughts on retirement in a dream world? When are you retiring? What are you gonna do? Do you ever retire? Like, what's your plan?
I don't think I probably would never be a hang it up and just not do anything. I think if I retired, I'd probably go to that dream job of being a teacher, which I probably would be totally fine with being a high school teacher or something along those lines, and just kind of donating my pay to the high school or something along those lines. I think that'd be cool. Whether or not I did that in Texas or Georgia. My wife's from Georgia. She's from Augusta, so there's a decently strong pull taking us back.
Eventually get back to the motherland. I understand. Okay, so let's close it out. Who should I have on the show next?
So I think that given that they're calling all the shots, right, and you kind of heard my arguments on capital scarcity in the industry and that sort of thing, I think you ought to have a capital allocator on here, right? So who are the end-all, be-all investors in private equity funds and hedge funds and public equities, right? That can kind of
so someone from an endowment, from the
endowment,
investment
foundation,
team,
pension plan, something along those lines. I'll give you some names. I don't want to name them out here.
Yeah. Don't name out here, but someone interesting.
Yeah. That sounds good. I can get you some names. Only ones that are pro oil and gas, obviously.
That's right. I don't need anyone coming on the Energy Executive Profile talking about clean energy.
Yeah.
Okay.
How many shares of Tesla did you short today? It's a lot.
Right. It's gone down quite a bit. Well, Matt, thanks for your time. Really enjoyed it. Everyone, have fun at NAPE, and let's keep this going. We'll talk to you guys later.